Let's get started. So, I wanted to do the interview in more of a chronological order of your life. So, like starting as a kid, and then as you got older, how things have changed. You're not that old yet, but relatively.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yeah. So, to start off, what were your hobbies as a kid, and how they changed as you've grown up?
Yeah, hobbies as a kid, lots. I've always loved a good hobby and still do, actually. But I played pretty much all the sports. Australia is a very sport-centric country, so I grew up playing soccer, tennis, cricket, um, were probably the three big sports that I played pretty much my entire life. But like athletics is a big sport for us as well. So um, I was quite good at discus and javelin until everyone else got taller and bigger than I did, and I hit puberty about 10 years later than they did. So
Yikes.
there's only there's only so far technique can get you before someone just much bigger than you can just throw things further. So I did lots of athletics as well growing up, but then I got into stamp collecting weirdly because I'm such a cool kid. I was stamp collecting for a few years there. Um, what other hobbies were there? Oh, and then photography, obviously. Yeah, probably the biggest one is that I started taking photos just because we had a photography club at school where we were, yeah, like there was you took some photos and we had a teacher that would teach us how to use Photoshop and stuff. So I did that for a couple of years of high school. And then as I started traveling, just started getting more and more into photography, and it's kind of stuck with me period through waves, but periodically. But yeah, obviously still doing it to this day, as you all know. So
Yeah. That's really cool. I mean, that's quite the journey I guess you've made. Um, wow. So next question. As a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up, and again, how did that evolve as you got older?
yeah, I don't really remember what I wanted to be as a kid, to be honest with you. Like as a young kid, um, I'm sure it probably changed constantly. But
Yeah.
I also grew up in a very rural area of the countryside in Australia, so I honestly didn't even know like that many jobs existed. My dad's a farmer, and before that, he was a cabinet builder, so a carpenter. Um, my mum worked at a bank, and then when they moved to the farm, she was just she was a housewife and a gardener, and that's the thing that she did. So besides those two jobs, and then my uncle was an accountant, so I kind of knew that was a thing. And then whatever I saw in the movies. As I got to high school, I guess I was an argumentative kid in general, and I did debating for a couple of years and was half decent at it. So I thought maybe becoming a lawyer was something that I was really interested in. So um, sort of got a bit more involved in that, and then the business subjects like accounting and economics came super easy to me. So everyone basically told me that business is what I should be doing. So um, everyone from like my parents, from family members, from the careers advisor, from teachers at school, they were all just like, you should be a business person, like some sort of business person. Um, it sort of turned into accounting, and then for many different reasons, I always wanted to be in charge. We could turn this into a therapy session, but just some sort of like desire to feel powerful at some point. I guess as a high school student, I'm sure lots of kids can relate. When you feel like you're powerless as a teenager, you want to grow up to be an adult and be someone that's in charge of other people as a response to that. And so I always said for a couple of years, I said like later in my high school days that I wanted to become the CEO of a multinational company, which I just felt was like as high up as you could go, like
Yeah,
as
it's
as
peak.
be in charge of as many people as possible. So basically, like Elon Musk, classic capitalism. So that's sort of where I thought I'd wanted to go, and so that sort of turned into my life's journey for a few years, where the careers advisor and teachers were saying you should become like an auditor, which is a fancy accountant, basically, as a good stepping stone to becoming, a future CEO. So that's what I did. I went and studied business and accounting at university, and just continued on that because that's what everyone in my life was telling me to do, and hated it. got about 3 years into I mean, 3 years into becoming an accountant. So I graduated with two bachelor degrees. Became an auditor at one of the biggest accounting firms in the world for 3 years and just absolutely hated it. So then gave it all up, moved to Canada, and started again. Here we are. not doing accounting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you don't like it, you just can't do it, can you?
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really cool. I mean, I bet a lot of people can relate to what you said there. I mean, and what you said earlier with the Photoshop classes and in your high school.
Hmm.
I was going to be taking one of those, but I advised against it, and I ended up taking an arts class. Um, Needless to say, it was the worst mistake of my life. I mean, the arts class, it was great, and now I can draw, so there's that.
Yep.
But what happened was there was just so much work every single day, and we'd have like 4 or 5 assignments per week, and it was crazy.
Hmm.
But yeah, now I can draw, so
Now you can draw. Yeah. I mean, that's a great
yeah,
skill to have.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's that. And for the next question, what was your favorite thing to do as a teenager?
Favorite thing to do as a teenager? Um, be playing sport, some sort of sport. I mean, that was sort of my outlet in my teenage years for sure. There wasn't a whole lot else going on in my life as a teenager. Um, I was at a boarding school, so I literally was at school from 8 till 3, and then I just stayed at school. Like I just like never left. My parents lived 3.5 hours away, so I didn't see them except for weekends every couple of weeks. They'd come down to visit, so there wasn't exactly a whole lot else going on. It's not like there was that many clubs and classes after school hours, obviously, because that's not what high school's really made for. Um, so my thing was sport. So every afternoon I was playing some sort of sport. We had practice for 2 hours after classes were finished, 2 times a week, and then on a Saturday, every single Saturday for basically the entire of high school, I played sport. And because we were part of a fancy schools group, I guess, and most of the other schools were in Brisbane, almost every Saturday it meant jumping on a bus at 6:30 a.m. to travel 2 hours to Brisbane to play sport at one of the big Brisbane schools. So that's what I did. I played all the things, and then if I wasn't at training for one of the sports, I was shooting hoops at the basketball court in the back of the boarding house, or we were playing touch footy on the fields, or we were kicking a soccer ball, or I was running through the woods, or yeah, always something.
That's like a pretty fun high school career. I mean, playing sports every weekend and doing whatever, I guess that's pretty fun.
Yeah, and that's how they kept us all occupied because otherwise they'd have to pay someone to
Yeah.
do other things. So yeah, it's easier
Yeah,
just to
for sure.
have a field and go kick a ball around.
Cool. What sports did you play specifically? Like, did you have a favorite, or did you just play all?
Pretty much all of them. So at our school, we had sort of 3 seasons of sports that sort of corresponded with our semesters. So um, we played cricket in the summer, and then we played tennis as like the in between period, and then I played soccer throughout the winter. Um, there was the alternatives to that were like if you didn't play cricket, you were playing volleyball. If you weren't playing tennis, you were playing basketball, and if you weren't playing soccer, you were playing rugby. So you sort of like chose between the two sports for that season. And I'd say for most of the kids at the school I was at, or the boarders school anyway, like the boarders, almost everyone played a sport because there was literally nothing else to do. The day kids obviously they just like went home, so a lot of them didn't play sport. But oh, and chess. Actually, there was four. Chess was the other one that I played as well, throughout the winter as well. So I'd catch an early bus down to Brisbane, play a 2 hour chess match with someone, and then I'd run across the field to play a soccer match for the next 2 hours. So
Speaking of chess, I mean, if you're good at it, we should have a chess tournament sometime.
I haven't played since I was about 18, 17, 18, but I would like to get back into it.
Yeah,
I've got a collection of chess boards back home at home in Australia. So every time I travel, I like to find like a niche, cool, like looking chess set. So I have about five, I think. And my parents gave me like a real fancy stone and marble chess set as my graduation gift when I graduated from university. So,
that's really cool.
but they're just display items. Yeah, I don't actually
Yeah,
play on them.
yeah,
I would like to get back into it
yeah,
though, for sure.
yeah. We should host a chess tournament. We'll figure that out. I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
shouldn't be too hard.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So you said you played cricket. Did you? How? What position did you play in? Like, what was your high score?
I wasn't a batter at all. I was too small, I think, to be a really good batter. And by small, I don't just mean like tall or short. I
Yeah,
also just mean like physically small. Um, I was a decent bowler though. I was a fast bowler. I just had long arms and a long run up, and I could stay relatively quick. I was never like in the best teams at school or anything. I was probably like seconds or thirds for most of the sports I played. But yeah, as a bowler for sure, one of the openers or like the first changeover. And then I probably batted at like six or something, which I think is pretty standard, pretty standard midfield. So like, if I got a score of 30, I think that was a good day for me. But for the most part, it was like 10 to 20 runs was a good outing for me.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't matter what team you're on as long as you're having a good time. It's just high school, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now, finally, to the next question. What was your most memorable moment as a teen?
Hmm. Um, it's a good question. It's probably science related, to be honest. So in grade 12, I did a science camp. Um, and I think at the time, like science wasn't really that important to me. It was like I had chosen to do chemistry in grade 11 and 12 just because I didn't want to cancel out the option of doing one of the many science degrees that requires you to have like a single science subject at least, or a single STEM subject. Um, I was like a nerd, obviously, in school. I did quite well academically, but the science camp always seemed like something that just like wouldn't be for me. But I wanted to do it because it sounded cool, and like one of the guys that went the year before I did said like, I think you should do this. It'd be really good for you, but I didn't really understand what it was. Um, and it ended up obviously changing my life. It's literally the reason why I'm here talking to you all today, and why I'm still involved in this sort of youth in STEM um, programming. But after that, which was at the start of year 12, I think I came back, and I remember like must have been a few months later, I got the call to say that I'd been asked back to be a staffy, which is kind of like an ambassador program at Canada Wide Science Fair, but the camp is much more personal development focused as opposed to STEM focused. And so being a staffy meant that you had to be this like energetic, always on like leader. So it almost be like Canada-wide Science Fair was being run by the ambassadors, and you never met Team UV. That's kind of how the Australian camp worked at the time. So the staffies were young, like they were only a year or two older than us. They'd literally gone to the STEM camp the year or two before the students had. So I remember being called up, and there was four of us, so three of us from the same school that had been asked to go to this like training camp, and then from the training camp they selected, I think like 30 out of the 60 people that went to the training camp. And I think I got chosen there as one of only two from our school. And I remember that being the moment where I was like, oh, like this is actually something, like they've seen something in me. Obviously, I was a very shy, introverted kid before I went to the science camp, um, which doesn't correspond to being a staffy at all. Like you can't be a shy, introverted kid. Like you have to be like outgoing, and you have to take leadership, and you're guiding these students for 2 whole weeks. So I think that was a moment where I was like, oh, it's like I do feel different, but I got that external validation from an organization I respected to say like, hey, we actually also see this within you. Um, so what can you do for us, basically? And so I remember that being a really important moment of that high school life of mine. Um, and I think I became quite a different person in year 12, where I like didn't care so much about the what everyone else was saying to me or stuff. Like I didn't really the bullying itself didn't like mean as much to me anymore, because I felt more confident in who I was, and I knew that I was close to getting out. Um, and I knew that there were other kids just like me around the country that just didn't happen to be in my school. But I knew that there was a group of people that I could really, really get along with. I just had to bide my time, I guess, for a little bit longer, and then and then that would open up my life to something completely different. So that's the moment I knew that life wasn't like high school, which I think is an important moment that if you haven't got to yet, you don't quite understand. But once you hit that point in your high school life, completely changes your worldview on everything, I think. So I'm excited for you all to hit that point. But just know that high school isn't real life, and it never will be. You have to suffer through. You have to suffer through it all, for better or worse.
So
Um,
you're saying it gets worse than this, is what you're saying?
no, not at all. I'm saying high school can be the worst moment for a lot of people. but that's not what real life has to be like, and it's very rarely like high school. It is a microcosm of yeah, people going through uncertain periods of their life. And so when you hit the point where you realize that everyone else is just as insecure as you are yourself, and real life is, I mean, there's obviously people, everyone's still insecure, but um, yeah, I think you realize that it's a bit different once you get out. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring.
Oh. We'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, wow. Well, that's quite something. Let's go to the next question, I guess.
Hit me. Yeah, yeah.
Tell us about your journey coming to Canada and working with Youth Science Canada. I mean, that
hmm
seems like a pretty big thing in your life. You said you were doing auditing and then
Yep.
you threw it all away to come to Canada. How did that work out?
Yeah. So I'll tell you the story. So yeah, so I did a STEM camp in grade 12 called National Youth Science Forum. Best thing that's ever happened to me in my life. Still, I actually live now in a place a few doors down from someone I met in year 12 at science camp. She was from Melbourne, and now we're best friends. Has it been like 13 years now? And so I moved to this location to actually live closer to her and her fiance, oh, her husband now actually, her husband, and yeah, it's the community of people I met at that science camp, the STEM camp. Yeah, changed my life basically, as I said. And so from that, that was at the start of year 12. So then obviously went through all year 12. Got super involved in the organisation still, so I was selected to go represent Australia in South Africa at a South African science camp, which was really cool. And then got chosen to be a staffie, so an ambassador basically the next year. And then from that group of 20 people, I got chosen to come back a second year as like an admin staffie. And they only choose 5 people from the 20 from the year before. And then from that experience, 2 years after that, I got chosen to come back and run the staff program for one of the sessions in Australia. And so during that time, I'd finished university and I'd started working as an accountant, but still had this like hobby basically that was taking up some of my free time throughout the holidays and over Christmas, like just after Christmas is when it was run in January. So at the start of the year, I was going to this science camp and then coming back to like my day job. So I was like moonlighting as a youth STEM educator or like programmer, I guess, which is really cool. Um, so throughout that period of time, the second year I was a staffie, so that was 2012. I um, met this girl, Jessie McAlpine. Some of you probably met her at Canada Wide Science Fair this year. Um, she came over as a guest to the Australian Science Camp. Back then, Australians would send a delegation of 5 people, I think, to Canada Wide Science Fair, and Canada Wide would send about 2 or 3 students to the Australian program as a sort of like international exchange program. We don't do that anymore, unfortunately, which is super unfortunate. Um, but yeah, so Jessie and I met. She was a student and I was a staffie, and just throughout that period of interacting with one another, we became friends. And after she went back to Canada, she was turning her science fair project into some sort of like commercial option, or she was assessing the commercial viability of her project. And so, because I was studying business and was learning about this at university, I was giving her some business advice about what to do in terms of how to turn something into a commercial opportunity, um, how to go about like finding lawyers and talking to business partners, and how to communicate with that sort of business world from a scientific perspective. And so we kind of stayed in touch over the years. And then once I knew that I didn't want to be an accountant, I went traveling, came back, still didn't really want to become an accountant. So then I was looking for something to change, I guess, in my life. I knew I wanted to be a different person, but I just didn't know how to go about that. And so I figured the easiest way is to completely change my environment. So completely get out of my comfort zone, get away from the world that I'd created in the city and the work life I'd done, and start somewhere fresh, and then figure things out. So my youngest brother had never been overseas before. He really wanted to go to Canada. I had always been considering Canada as a cool option. My dad had come to visit when he was in his early 20s, decades ago, and so it was always in the back of my mind. And so we started looking at a trip in Canada. It's super easy to get a visa for an Australian. You get a 2-year working visa pretty instantaneously. You pay a couple $100 and you can come work over here for 2 years. And so I thought, let's do that. So my brother and I came over, we traveled around together for 5 weeks, and then he flew home and I just stayed and started looking for jobs. Was working minimum wage at a few different jobs for a couple of years. Um, but during that time, I'd reconnected with Jessie, and she had said that if I ever come to Canada, let her know, and she'll get me involved in Canada-wide Science Fair, basically. And so I was like, hey, I'm here. Like, I'm in the country. I think I moved here in September 2017, and she was like, sweet, Canada-wide's obviously in May. We'll get you as a volunteer on the team. So she, was talking to Team EV at the time, which was Rennie and Julia, and they said, well, we don't really know who this person is. We don't know what he can offer us, but if he wants to pay for his own flights to Ottawa, we'll have him on the team as a volunteer, and he can do basically whatever he wants a week. And so I paid $850 return flight or whatever to go volunteer at Canada-wide Science Fair, and then I spent the entire week taking photos and making daily videos, which you've probably seen on our YouTube channel. And at the end of the week, Rennie and Julie were just like, this kid has worked and hasn't slept for an entire week. We should probably pay for his flights. So they reimbursed me for my flights and I was in. So then 2019, I went to Fredericton and did the same thing, did photos and videos. And then 2020 hit and I saw that YSC needed help. I saw that there was no real communications happening except for the week of Canada-wide. And so I put together a 5-page proposal, I think, and emailed it to the executive director and just said, hey, I think you should pay me to manage your social media. I'll do it for a couple of grand a month. I will do everything. I'll handle everything. You don't have to be involved. I'll create my own strategies and programming and create my own graphics and just handle all the social media. This is why it's important. This is why we should try to keep people entertained. And so I did that. I started managing social media for 2 years throughout COVID, obviously helping during the virtual years as we very quickly switched to an online platform, which I just happened to have the skill and interest in helping with. So then I became Julia, who's a fair director. I became her offsider during those years too. And then I realized after 2 years that we kind of needed someone setting strategy for all communications, that social media doesn't really work unless you have someone also coordinating all the communications across the organization. And so last year, I again wrote a massive big proposal to Rennie and convinced him to create this new position called a communications manager, who handles pretty much everything from internal communications to emailing, to newsletters, to social media, to setting strategy, to handling a lot of the technology stuff in the back end, which we just hadn't had before. And so that's kind of how I got involved in the communications manager role, and that's now why I manage a Discord server, and I sent out, 25,000 emails or something leading up to Canada-wide Science Fair, and why you're still hearing from me today.
I'm speechless. That's a lot. I mean,
It is a lot.
you're saying you spent $850 to buy this plane ticket together, so that's like the best 850 you've spent.
Yeah, I mean, it was a risk for sure. I didn't really have the money, but I knew that Canada-wide was a cool experience. Like, I knew it was an organization I really wanted to be involved with, and I took the gamble that if I paid this money now, that I would be part of the team, basically. I knew that wasn't the standard, and I knew I could do good work, so I was hopeful that they would reimburse me once they saw what I could do for them, but I knew that it wasn't anything set in stone, so yeah, it's just about having that confidence in your skill set. And if you show passion for it and you do good work, then usually you can get rewarded for it. So
I mean, yeah, either way, it's $850 for like a solid week of just having a good time. So
exactly,
yeah,
and that's the thing. Like, I'd never been to Ottawa before. $850 for flights, but then I had a full week of hotel. Well, it wasn't hotel; it was
yeah,
university accommodation and food, and this cool experience. Like, as I said, the Australian one was it's priceless to me. I
yeah,
wouldn't be an interesting person now without it. So $850 to have that experience one more time, that was a risk I was willing to take.
yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I can after being to Canada wide in person, it's nothing like the virtual one, but it was really quite something. Probably the
hmm
best week of my life as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of many,
Yeah,
hopefully.
yeah. So that's really cool. So how has your work at YSC evolved over the years, and mainly how do you see it changing in the future?
Yeah. So as I said, obviously started as just the camera guy back in 2018. I barely interacted with the students. I was taking photos from them at a distance. I gave myself a crazy workload. I was doing daily videos and taking hundreds of photos a day, thousands of photos a day, editing them and getting them up online, um, which is important. I think capturing those moments is it's important for many reasons. It's important for the individuals, for the actual participants, because as you said, this is a life-changing experience for a lot of people, and they want to see themselves doing that. Like they want a record of that memory. Um, but then it's also important for the organization because we use those photos to capture emotion, to tell a story, to get sponsors involved, to get donors involved, um, to let parents know what even happens during the week. Before that, we didn't really have anything to show a parent like this is actually what your kid's doing for a full week. Like this is why it's actually a fun event. This is why we do what we do. We hadn't had that for many years, probably since the team sort of went from being a big team to a very small team way back in like the late 2000s or something. So I felt it was important to capture that. So my work sort of started there as a camera guy. In 2019, I started doing a few more interviews with students and participants on camera, working with Jesse McAlpine. So my job sort of changed a little bit then. And then 2020 changed obviously dramatically. I started doing far more graphic design work. I was still doing videos. Social media became far more important, obviously, because there wasn't any in-person interaction. So social media became the only way for us to connect with people, to connect with our youth. Um, 2020 was sort of one of those years where things flipped so quickly that um, it's we did as much as we possibly could. It was an extreme amount of work, but we knew that we could do virtual better, basically. So going into 2021, we were super excited. Um, I got far more involved with Julia, as I said, so I was helping make a lot of the decisions on what to do with as part of the virtual event. Um, and because it's all content, like it's all video content or design content, my workload shifted from just doing a couple of social media posts a week to then having to do month-long content creation strategies. And in 2022, for example, like I worked from February 1st to May 20th, like 200 hours a month. Like I think I was working from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. 6.5 days a week, basically. There was just so much to do to make a virtual event happen, and it sort of snowballed. So we didn't really have the chance to bring on extra people because one, we had no money. It was a virtual event. We weren't charging the regions that much money to attend, so our budget was super low, and also I just overcommitted myself because I wanted to make it a fun event. I wanted it to look cool. I wanted it to be pretty. I wanted it to be fun, and so that's how that work sort of escalated then too. And then obviously when I saw that the virtual world was missing a lot of that in-person engagement, I went out on a limb and convinced the executive director and all of the regions to let me run a Discord channel, Discord server. This was something we had never thought about, never talked about. There was never anything about Discord or sort of like into like actual personal one-on-one instantaneous connection with youth planned. Um, Mainly because who had the time, who even knew what it was. Instagram seemed to be working for us, but I recognize that Instagram doesn't actually facilitate that much relationship building. It's not like the early days of Instagram where you would make a friend in the comments, or it's not really, it wasn't really like a Reddit thing that we could be pursuing because what do you post in Reddit to build a community for a science fair? We didn't have any of those resources to create a Reddit community in the same way, but I recognize that Discord could be something that, one, is a platform most of you are already using. Maybe not most, but a lot of you are already using. Um, I, I toss, I really considered going on to Guild. I don't know if anyone knows what that is, but Guild is another platform kind of like Discord. It has better features, but it's not popular. And so I sort of wrestled with the idea of, do I go with something that might have better features but no one's on and try to convince people to move to a platform? Or do we just stick with the platform we know, build a community, and do what we can? And so a bit of a risk, but I think Discord's turned out quite well. Obviously, that's why we're here.
Yeah, I mean, we are here now,
We are here
so
now. So that was the focus for probably like the last 12, 18 months. And then with the new job now, a lot of my time needs to move away from external communication just for a hot minute. to building a lot of our foundation. So YSC has gone through a lot of turmoil and waves over the last probably decade and a half. We've gone through a few different executive directors, and we've had some financial trouble over the last 15 years. And so that is, it has like unintentionally created a lot of different business processes and different setups just because there's so many things for very few people to handle that you sort of like put a solution into place and kind of band-aid fix it and then leave it and then build on top of it just to get the things done. And so I'm stepping back a little bit for the next few. That's what I have been doing for like the last 6 months and probably for another 6 more months just to get some of those business behind the scenes business processes. I'm still a business kid at heart, even though I'm in a science organization now, a STEM organization. But just to get some of those, behind the scenes foundation set up. So there's a bunch of technology software implementations that we need to fix and maybe change up what we offer. Our communication with the regions needs to change up a little bit and get a bit smoother. And just sort of spending a lot of time thinking about what we should be prioritizing as an organization. So it's becoming a more effective way to use the limited budget that we get each year as a nonprofit. So just trying to maximize a lot of outcomes with as little inputs as possible. And so that's sort of what I'm focusing on at the moment. And then once hopefully a few of those things are fixed and our regions are super happy, I mean, they're very happy, but even happier and they're running effectively because a lot of regions are struggling, obviously coming out of COVID. If we have happy regions, then our impact gets wider very quickly. And so it's easier to work with 100 regions and then get them to outreach to 10,000 people each than it is for me to try to find 100 times 10,000, what is that? 1 million students across the country. How do I find 1 million students across the country to interact with personally one-on-one? It's easier to try to like spread out our reach across the region. So that's what I'm focusing on now, our regional communication for sure. A bunch of technology implementation stuff, and obviously still keeping Discord as much as possible, with the intention being that in 12 months' time, if I'm optimistic, more realistically, 2 years' time, YSC is in such a good, strong position internally that we can then start to expand externally into some really cool stuff. And I think that's where my STEM space is hopefully going, starting to build online learning courses into the different skills required to do, good science fair projects. And, um, you know, the idea is to like have a portal where you can find STEM opportunities in your local region, and Discord is in a super strong place. So we have that, or like something like Discord is in a strong place where we have, that strong direct connection with youth. Our regions are doing super well. They're fundraising money well. They're running really cool regional fairs, and we can sort of reprioritize our focus away from being just Canada-wide science fair to we just want the most important thing is for Canadian youth to do STEM projects. If you make it to Canada-wide, amazing. We want to celebrate you. It's a huge achievement just to make it to Canada-wide science fair. But if you don't make it, you haven't wasted your time. You've actually done a really cool thing, and we want you to keep with that throughout the rest of your life. So that's probably where my work is shifting over the next 12 months, hopefully longer if they keep me around. So
If they keep me around, proposes a plan for the next 5 years.
oh, I've got a plan for the next 10 years.
Yeah, yeah, that's you've clearly done a lot of thinking into what you plan to do, and honestly, that's great because you know what you want to do, you know how you want to achieve it, and what that would look like. So, wow, that's really
Just
cool.
gonna make it happen.
Yeah, you just gotta make it happen.
Yeah.
Speaking of you putting on all of that work into the virtual fair,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I can say, having been there that week, it was really wonderful. I mean, feed loop was great. There were a few bugs here and there, but that's to be expected with any virtual platform with that capacity. And it was so like the graphic design was impeccable. I mean, the gamification was super fun. Yeah, and even the live streams were really great.
Yeah, we were very
I
happy with
also,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
I also love Stu Rowan. That was great too.
Yeah, it's true, right? We need to we need to find a way to bring that back to an in-person fair. I don't really know what that looks like. I'm always open to ideas and suggestions, but that was such a fun way to share information every day. And I think we could use that at an in-person fair somehow. We just need to figure out a way to do that effectively.
I mean, you could just have what you guys had with the first day, I mean, debriefing thing that
Hmm.
we had with the seminar. Have like a little table, and then you guys sitting there.
Yeah. Should we live stream it still though? So like every morning
I
there's
mean,
two
you
of us
could.
at a
That'd be even
desk.
better, right?
All the kids are watching us on their phones. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be cool for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing there's a lot of possibility there to expand and bring things back.
Mhm.
So, yeah, really cool there. Now for the next question, what's your favorite part of the job? You've mentioned that you've been doing so many things. You used to just be taking photos, now you're taking internal communications, checking about external communications, and now you're taking a bigger role at YSC. But overall, what is your most enjoyable part and your favorite part of the job?
Yeah. I mean, I love this job to death. Obviously, it's why I keep committing to it. It's why I keep trying to expand how much I'm involved in. I think the second favorite thing I love most about this job is the variety and like the freedom basically to run with the ideas I have and just like as I say, like I'm doing so many different things and I love it. I would hate to be an accountant and just do Excel spreadsheets every day. I love having the variety. But the most important, I mean, it sounds cheesy to say, but it is seeing what my work can do for the youth, right? There's a reason why I wanted to start a Discord community. There's a reason why I truly believe in building those interpersonal connections between one another. And it all comes back down to knowing the experience that I had in high school and knowing how much I really like desperately wanted to have a community of people just like me, and that wasn't possible to find in the small community that I was from. So to think about what would have been, amazing for me to have, and knowing the experience I had at the Australian STEM camp, to be able to be involved with that and to help create those connections, that platform, that community, that experience for Canadian youth. I mean, that's everything to me. That's what I love most about this job. And if if you all at the end of the day have an amazing experience at Canada Wide Science Fair, incredible. If it's life changing for even a few of you, then I couldn't ask for anything more. And for those that didn't make it, if I can create something that still shows the importance of STEM, that shows the importance of community, and keeps you interested in following your curiosity, then I'm living the dream.
And I think you're basically there. I mean, I guarantee that there was a lot of people I can't know that I met that were like, this is something like I've never seen before. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was really great.
Good. I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, human to human interaction is what a lot of us live for, and yeah, I mean, I don't see anything more valuable than that in a job like yours. So.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
So next, what would you say are your top three strengths and things you want to improve on?
Woohoo! All right. Top three strengths. Um, Number one, I think, is um, constant learning. I think is a strength of mine. I think not enough adults specifically commit to constantly, or even wanting to, but commit to constant learning. I think a lot of people get their lives, they settle into the way of life they have, and that's it for them. They just sort of stop there. I personally though, like this morning even, I was like I do online online courses while I'm making breakfast and I'm listening to videos constantly. I am always finding Reddit groups to join to learn something about the software I use, to learn about the places I'm living in. I like knowing things about anything. I think being a jack of all trades is one of the things I'm most proud of. I know it um, goes against what society currently values and in its current structure. But I love it. I love being a jack of all trades. I love having various interests, and I love sharing that knowledge with other people. So that's for sure number one strength. Number two, I think passion is also a strong part of mine. Is that I recognize I could be doing lots of different things in this life. I recognize the skills that I have could be valuable at other companies, probably being paid more, but the impact I have with YSC, I see is the most important use of my skill set, of my time, of my energy. And so that brings me joy, as I just said. So being able to commit to following my passion, I think, is something that not a lot of people do. Um, and like that, they don't want to risk things, and which I totally understand. I totally get it. Life is tough. Um, to risk certain things is difficult, and to have the privilege to be able to risk is enormous. It's not something that I ignore. It's not something that I don't recognize. Um, but I like that. I like that I find passion through my work, um, even if it's hard sometimes. And number three, I think, is um, strength of mind is building community, I think. Um, which I think is interesting because in my personal life, I don't know if I'm the best at making friends, but once you are a friend of mine, I will do anything for you. Basically, I will. I'm always looking for a way to connect the different people I know with opportunities that only I know. I like being a connector, which I think is important in a communications role like the one that I have. So if I, for example, I know that Johan in the Discord server is great at programming, and I knew there was a few of you wanting to learn to programming, so it just makes sense to make those connections. Um, People spend their entire lives thinking about their own little worlds, and um, the harder life gets, and the more things you have going on, the harder it is to see how you can benefit other people. But there's a reason why charity exists. There's a reason why people donate money. There's a reason why non-profits are still and always will be a thing. Um, and it's because it feels good to do something nice for other people. It feels good to feel valued. It feels good to know that something you know or a skill you have is appreciated and valued by other people. And so if I can make those connections, it improves the life of the person receiving something and also the person giving it. So I like that. What I want to work on, I think, so many things. I want to work on I want to continue working, I guess, on constantly questioning the assumptions I hold. I think it's something that's super important. I think it's something that gets more and more important every day. Um, Making sure that I'm not falling into biases that I shouldn't have. Now, obviously, that's something that you have to spend your entire life working on. It's not something that you ever just achieve. You don't get a certificate to say like, "Well, you're no longer biased about this certain thing." It is a constant effort. So I think that all comes back down to why I'm sure we'll get to this question at some point too about why STEM is an important part of life and why everyone should be following it. Is that we it's important to stay curious because that curiosity is how you become a better person. It's how society becomes better. And without that curiosity, you'll never question yourself even. So you have to be okay with questioning yourself. You have to be okay with thinking you don't know everything. As a teenager, that was something I struggled with. I always thought I was right. Um, Sometimes I was because I learn a lot of things, and so often, I know something that other people don't know. So it sometimes makes it easier to be right, but that doesn't mean you're right by default, and that just because you read a headline once, that it means you know everything. So I do want to work on constantly questioning my assumptions and my biases, and just making sure that I'm always being considerate of others, right? And then on the flip side of that, I want to also work on not being too considerate of others that I then harm my own life. There is it's good to be nice. I think everyone should be a nice person, but being too nice can also be more damaging in the long run. So, um, classic case, like I'm basically a free therapist for a lot of my friends and have been in the past, but I'm getting better at setting boundaries around like when I take on your emotional distress. It obviously like I get stressed out for you and I want to help you, but just knowing that you can't force a fix on someone. They have to be willing to want your help, and just sometimes people just need to vent, right? Like sometimes people just need a place to complain to, and so I'm happy to be there and listen, always. But I do know that I need to get better at not always suggesting an answer or an opinion or something. I just need to be open to letting them talk and letting them figure it out themselves, which I think I'm getting far better at. But obviously, it is something that I know I need to focus on, as I wasn't great at it 10 years ago. and it's something that you have to spend your entire life being. But one of the most important questions I think you can ask someone going through or needing help is, um, do you want to just tell me your issue, or would you like me to find a solution with you? And I think setting that expectation up front is something that I'm learning is important. So yeah, communication. It's all about communication, right? And even as someone who's kind of specializes in communication to some extent, it's hard. It's really hard, especially when personal relationships and emotions get involved. So communicate. Always communicate.
Wow. That's really that's some knowledge I'd like to pick up on there. The communication manager himself saying communication's at heart. That's a little bit interesting
Communication
there,
is
but
hard.
yeah, I 100% agree with that one. I mean, just figuring out what that person expects from you or what they want out of that conversation really is pretty important there, for sure. And wow, that was really inspiring again. That's a common theme
Do
out
I
of
have the
this
job?
interview.
Do I have the job? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. So, what are some top tips that you'd say for science communication? I know the template for science fair and a lot of things have changed this year specifically for science communication,
Mhm.
but what would you say summarize are the top tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, again, communication is really hard. Scientific communication, even harder. I mean, you're basically trying to distill something that you have expertise knowledge in, something that you've obtained usually over months, if not years of study and experimentation and a passion for, and try to distill all of that into words, into a language that another person without any of that knowledge can understand, and probably more importantly, understand the importance of, which I think is the step that a lot of people miss, is that you can't. There's no, especially the scientists, we often like to just stick to the logic, like the logical um, frameworks that we are taught. So you know, if if this expertise gets distilled by using this language, then this should happen. Like the person should understand. What I think a lot of scientists forget is that emotion is very important, and again, biases and assumptions and stereotypes and background are all part of the way that someone interprets information. So just using plain English language isn't usually enough for someone to fully understand what you're trying to communicate to them. So bring in storytelling, for example. I know I harp on about it all the time, but storytelling is so important at at setting the scene, providing the context, bringing in emotion to what you're trying to say, but also it helps set you up as someone like an expert that someone wants to listen to. There's a many different forms of expertise, of qualification. You could provide a certificate. For some people, that certificate will be enough. Like if you have your Bachelor of Science on the wall behind you, some people will walk into your office and be like, okay, I should listen to this person. I think as we're seeing now more than ever before, those old school forms of legitimacy of expertise aren't as important and aren't as trusted as they used to be. And so I think it becomes even more important to come up with a common story to tell, and a common way of connecting with people on an individual basis to set them up to want to trust you. And so I think if you bring in that humanity into your story, into the way you communicate your science, then they're more likely to want to listen to you. They're more likely to make it to the end of your speech, and also more importantly to actually trust you and trust what you're saying with them, because they've connected with you one to one. They've connected with you on a human level. And so when you say this science is so important because of X, Y, and Z, that X, Y, and Z connects with them because they've connected with you specifically. And so I think that's what a lot of people miss. They think that they can just say, here's some really complicated data. This is what it actually means. Like, trust me. Like, just trust me. And that just doesn't work anymore. So storytelling is important for engaging that humanity and engaging that emotional side of things. So that's that's probably the most important tip for sure, and that's why we harp on about it leading up to Candlelight Science Fair. That's why we say storytelling. Bring that into your judging experience. Um, Again, the judges are going to go into that session knowing you're a smart kid. That's why you're at Candlelight Science Fair. But if you can prove to them and connect with them on a personal basis, that overrides that bias instantly, and then they want to know more. And so that's probably the top tip is storytelling. Top tip two, bring in emotion. Tip three, connect with someone on a one-to-one personal basis, bring in that humanity. And then yeah, number four, I guess, is media literacy. So both in the way you communicate and also in the way that we educate the general public. We should be focusing on telling stories that mean something to them, that is important to them, but we should also focus on teaching them how to ascertain what is a good story. And so it sort of requires a two-pronged attack to scientific communication. We need to re-establish the expertise of people that have done the study and done the work to come up with important research papers and conclusions. We need to establish that credibility, but then we also need to talk about it in a way um, that I think actually is meaningful. And then the last thing I want to say to that is reminded me, that last sentence has reminded me, is that there's many different ways to go about communicating, and I think honesty and being proactive is the best way to do it. It's the best way to establish trust. It's why I've been honest with you throughout this interview, for example. It's why I'm always honest with you in the Discord server. You can ask me pretty much any question and I'll just tell you the truth straight up. Being honest with someone gives them a reason to trust you because then they know you're not going to lie to them. And so I think when you try to be smart about it and try to sort of trick someone into coming to the conclusion you want them to come to, works well until they find out it's a trick, or works well until they find out you hid something, or works well until they realize that there was another option, or something like that. Whereas if you present all the options, you're upfront about everything, and then you convince them, then they're with you the whole way. And that makes you a better communicator, and it makes what you're saying more effective as well.
Wow. Yeah, I can definitely relate with that as well. I mean, if someone doesn't trust you, doesn't matter what you tell them, right? They just will be like, all right, cool,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll walk away and never, they'll never, they'll never like reflect on that or think about what you said. That's done,
Yeah.
right? But then if you make that connection and kind of set up the stakes and why it's important, and if they understand that, then they'll be thinking about that for a long time, even after they've walked away from your project board or they've heard your speech or whatever like that.
Yeah, and the other piece to that, like, it's not only connecting with them, but it's also about connecting their knowledge and making sure that you both have the same understanding of the foundations. So, for a lot of the discourse around some of the biggest global issues we have right now, what I see is that people argue about the top level things. So, if it's climate change, for example, some people are for it, some people are against it. You're just being like, don't you see that NASA has these results, this is happening, and someone's like, no, it's happened before, and they're arguing at the top level. But what they fundamentally disagree on, the next level down, and this is what you have to try to figure out through a conversation, through a discourse, is that if this person doesn't trust the government, they're not going to trust NASA's results. So you can't use NASA's results in your argument to say you should believe us, this is happening, because they don't trust your source of evidence. And so then you have to go to the next level down. Why don't you trust the government? Because of these certain things. Well, how about I prove to you you should trust NASA at least because of these certain reasons? And then they're like, well, the moon landing was fake. And you're like, all right, well, let's start even lower then. That's why you don't trust NASA. All right, let's confirm this and build you up step by step. So it's all about going all the way back down to the fundamentals and starting with like, what information do you trust? And how can I use that information to then build on and provide the next logical step? So it's a step ladder approach to a conversation, to an argument. It's not start at the top and yell from your towers, because that'll never work, right? You're never going to convince someone who doesn't agree with any of the information you're providing as evidence. So just saying something is fact isn't enough. You haven't established their credibility. You haven't established why they should trust that evidence. Just the same reason why you don't trust their evidence or their source of information either. So
Yeah, I mean, I could not agree with that one more. I was gonna say that myself. I mean, if they don't understand the fundamental reason why you're arguing for that point, I mean, there's no point even arguing, right?
no, exactly.
You're never gonna achieve anything out of that conversation. Have to start at the basics and slowly, once you've reached agreement at that level, go on to the next logical step.
Yep.
And that's only like through a logical, non-aggressive kind of a conversation. That's kind of where you can actually achieve things. So
Hmm.
I really can agree with that one, Rory. Yeah. So next question. This is a little bit more on the friendly side, but I don't know, maybe not. Do you have any insider info you could share with us about doing well at science fairs?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess it, again, depends on your definition of doing well at science fairs, right? What is the point of a science fair? Is it the competition? Is it the awards? Is it the experience? Is it just making it? Is it the networking you can do? Is it the lab visits you get to go on? There's so many different things that you can take out of a science fair, out of a STEM fair. Um, we want, like YSC wants to change the focus away from just being all about the awards. I think we are slowly um, making that connection with finalists, and I hope you feel that the whole week isn't just about getting the awards. I know judging is a very important part. Obviously, it's why you're there in the first place, but the reason why YSC exists and the reason STEM fairs exist isn't to get an award at the end of the day. It's about doing a STEM project. It's about encouraging that critical thinking, encouraging that curiosity. So to do well at STEM fair, do that. Be curious. So make the most of the opportunity. Actually pay attention during lab tours. Ask questions. Meet friends. Get out of your comfort zone. That you're surrounded by people who are most likely to be as similar to you as any other person you'll ever meet in your life. This is a group of youth from across the country who you already know have at least one big similarity to you, is that they're all curious about some sort of STEM related topic. That's a huge piece that obviously breaks out into many different things. Usually they have the same interest to you in terms of like what they like to do as hobbies, or what subjects they're doing at school, what they want to do in the future. Um, so yeah, make those connections, make those friends. I think if you come away from Canada-wide Science Fair with a better understanding of what STEM represents, and you come away from the science fair with a network of people you've just met, even if you don't stay friends forever, although we really hope you do, but even just the knowledge that there are other people like you out there can be such a life-changing experience to have had, especially in high school. I mean, life is just starting. Like life doesn't start until high school finishes, basically. And so just like knowing that there are other people out there, know you can set your expectations around what is important to you, who you want to associate with, what you want to do with your life. So that to me is the key takeaways from the science fair. Now, obviously, if you want to do well in awards and in judging and that sort of thing, um, be good at being judged. So practice, be a good storyteller, all of those communication tips that I gave earlier. Um, work on that sort of stuff. Ask the questions, present it to your family, present it to friends who don't know anything about the project. Let them ask you questions. Even if you are sitting down thinking about questions you might get asked, I guarantee if you present it to someone who doesn't know a single thing about your project, they're going to ask you questions you couldn't even possibly think about because you're so in the weeds of it that you can't even think about the fundamentals or the very simple questions that you just assume is common knowledge. So, all of those sort of things. A lot of great projects really come down to the communication. The STEM can be super great, but if you aren't good at talking about it, then you've got no chance basically of doing well in judging. It all comes down to communication. Now, obviously, we want great communication too, um, but yeah, that's the important pieces for sure.
Wow, the communication manager focusing or putting a focal point on communication, guys. Who would have
Who
thought?
would have thought? And it's not just because I'm the communications manager.
Yeah, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I get it
I know.
for sure. I mean, that's a pattern I noticed as well this year, Caroline.
Yeah.
And finally, we've come towards the end of this interview. But one last question, just before
Hit me.
we're done here. What are some? Sorry, wrong question. Why is STEM important?
Oh, so many reasons. So let's get the boring ones out of the way. STEM, great career opportunities, lifelong learning, pays well sometimes sorry, Katie, not academics, but usually sets you up for a great future. Um, cool, great. Obviously a lot of jobs, all of those sort of boring ones. More importantly, however, STEM is important because it is the world. It's a study of the way the world is made up. It's the study of the way people interact with the world. It's the study of the way um, the makeup, how everything behaves, and coming to conclusions about all of that sort of stuff. It's about building critical thinking skills, problem solving skills. It's about staying curious, which I've hopefully given you many reasons for why staying curious is so important to people as we go through life. I mean, there's many different problems facing society, many different problems facing the world. The way to do something about that is through a STEM career. Um, and the only way to get into a STEM career is to want to do STEM, is to have that interest, that passion for science, technology, engineering, math. And that all comes back down to, as the fundamental basics, the fundamental levels, is curiosity, is being curious about something. STEM is so encompassing. It can come, you can pretty much make anything into a STEM project. For example, you can combine any sort of passion you have with those fields. That's what the Spark Idea Generator is all about. It's about typing in your hobby and figuring out, like, how do I bring something I'm passionate about to then bring it down to a scientific study. Build a hypothesis, experiment, test, come to a conclusion, test and repeat. So STEM is important for all of those reasons. But I think most importantly, it's just really cool. I mean, like, to put it simply, STEM is really cool. The people I know that have an interest in STEM, whether or not they're in a career, like a STEM career or not, they're just really cool people. They have a desire to want to know more. They have a desire to want to be good people. And obviously, it's not the only jobs to be a good person, but it definitely helps. I mean, you want to understand the way the world works and you want to improve it, you're generally likely to be a good person. So I hope you all think the STEM is important. I mean, I think you do, which is probably why you're here. But I really do hope that you, even if you don't, pursue a STEM career in your life, like I didn't pursue a STEM career in my life, but I hope you all do stay curious, recognize the importance of STEM, no matter what you go into, and stay involved. Like, even if it's as simple as helping out at your local science fair, if it's as simple as teaching your future kids about the importance of STEM, or giving them well, it won't be an encyclopedia or a YouTube Kyrgyzstan YouTube channel by then, probably. Who knows what the world will look like in the future when you're all having kids, but or if you don't have kids. But I hope you do keep keep a little bit of that spark of passion for STEM in your life, even if it's just about watching that YouTube channel or reading that news article about a new discovery or something. Talk about it. Get people interested in it. Nothing happens without STEM.
Funnily enough, it's funny that you mentioned Kyrgyzstan because interestingly enough, right, it was actually a video from Kyrgyzstan that inspired me to do a science fair project way back when in grade 6.
Mm-hmm.
And me continuing that project in grade 9 and now in grade 10 is what led me to Canada-wide Science Fair and having such a great week.
Love that. Absolutely love that. Yeah, now we need
Yeah.
to figure out how YSC can do that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we
I
get you
mean,
interested?
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I should partner with Kyrgyzstan. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love them. Love the great channel. Love their stuff.
Yeah, for
Love
sure.
their merch. Love everything they do.
Yep. All right. I mean, that concludes this interview. Unless Pramner, you had anything else there?
Yeah, I think it was a great interview. Very inspiring, Stu.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Doing
was really
okay.
great. I mean that was pretty much everything I wanted to cover. It's been well over an hour now. So yeah, great job, everyone.
Thanks for the
Thank you
chat.
so much, Stu. Yeah, thank you so much, Stu, Katie, and everyone else in the audience here for joining us today. And I hope you all have a great rest of your Sunday and Father's Day. If anyone who's spending time with their fathers, go out and do that. I mean, have a great rest of your day,
Yeah.
guys.
See you around the
And
server.
thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Stu, again for agreeing to do this. This was really
Of
great.
course. Anytime. Happy to help.
Cool. All right.
Bye
Bye,
all. Catch
guys.
you later.
See you guys.